Welcome to Gaming with the Stars. I'm your host, Chase Kuertz, and we have with us a special guest today. He is a physicist, former NASA physicist at that, used to work in missile defense, has a book out called My Big Toe. His name is Tom Campbell. Tom, if you would take it away, just kind of explaining what My Big Toe is actually about.
Okay, well, let's just talk about the title, My Big Toe. The toe in my big toe is not one of the appendages on my foot. It's TOE, which is the letters standing for Theory of Everything. Theory of Everything was an idea that started, I think, with Einstein because we had his relativity plus quantum mechanics, and those two had some trouble with each other. You know, each one kind of had an assumption that the other one denied was true. So they knew that there was something bigger, some other understanding that was above that, above quantum mechanics and relativity, from which you could derive both. So neither one seemed to be like the top position. There was something else more fundamental that was up above, and that was called then the toe, the theory of everything. But really what they meant by that was a theory of physics, a theory of everything as far as this objective reality goes. But now my big toe is big because it's not just a theory of the objective world, a theory of physics, it's a theory of everything. It's also a theory of the subjective world. Mind, consciousness. So it's a theory of consciousness as well. And it is a science that if once you understand it, then you can understand yourself as far as your thoughts, your feelings, how happy are you, how much anxiety do you have, stress levels, all that sort of thing. You can actually understand where they come from and why you have those and what you can do to get rid of them. Science you can use, that you can apply to use yourself individually. Now, the my gets into it because if it's not your experience, it can't be your truth. Right. I wanted to point that out to people, that this is based on my own experience and my own experience over probably about 40 years now of researching consciousness and being a physicist. And that I don't suggest that anybody believe it, because believing is part of the problem. You should always remain skeptical. So I emphasize, if it's not your experience, then it's not your truth. So if it's something that interests you, then you need to make it your experience. In other words, you need to go delve into it and see how it applies to you. Work with it, experiment with it, and come to that conclusion on your own. So that's my big toe. I have a set of quantum physics experiments being worked on now in California at Pomona, and they will lend some evidence to how my theory derives new physics. So it is, it is amenable to scientific research and to experimentation and so on. It's falsifiable. So it's real science. So that's it. Basically a theory of consciousness from which physics and the objective world can be derived.
Hello. Hi. How are you?
Hello.
We spoke yesterday. How are you?
Yes, we did, John. How are you?
Richard.
Hello. How do you? Hi. How are you?
Logic of virtual reality that
Die Logik der virtuellen Realität
interprets how these experiments
interpretiert, wie diese Experimente aufgebaut waren und wie sie funktionieren. Wir haben also Annahmen und wir gehen davon aus, dass nach Ablauf eines Experiments dieses oder jenes Ergebnis ausgeführt werden soll.
I never had a strong sense of what I wanted to be when I grew up. Still don't, I guess. You get that when you're young, right? What are you going to do when you grow up? I don't have any idea. But if anybody said, well, do you think you're going to travel around and give talks about, consciousness? I would have said, don't think so.
Now, I had a chance to actually read your book several years ago. Was quite a challenge. I would say the third part of the book really dived into a lot of the science, but I do want to brush my audience up on the fact that what you're positing in these books is that to our best knowledge and understanding currently, and we have things in our reality like video games and virtual reality, like the Oculus Rift, that give us an idea of what your theory is positing, that we are avatars in a situation, in a virtual reality, in a video game.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
That's right. That's fundamentally. My theory boils down to our bodies are avatars. We are consciousness. And the computer is consciousness. So consciousness is fundamental in my theory. It's the fundamental thing. Mm. Everything else, like this universe we call our physical reality, is virtual.
Yeah.
So when you dream, that's another virtual reality, different than this one. So you're a piece of consciousness. I call that an individuated unit of consciousness. And you are playing this body, your body, making all of its choices for it. So you tell that body what to do and when to do it. So you're the body's mind, if you will, mm-hmm. the body's consciousness. So that's how this comes out. And if you look at the virtual reality games, they work exactly the same way. The game No Man's Sky. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good one because it's computed in a similar way as our reality is computed, and that is they call it procedural programming, where everything is computed on the fly. Nothing is saved in memory. And you only compute what that person is looking at, what that person senses. So if they see things and hear things, you compute that. When they turn their head and look another direction, you compute that. And what you had computed before, you don't save. If they turn back and look at that again, well, you recompute it. So everything's computed on the fly as it's needed. And that's basically the way this reality is done. So we are a piece of consciousness getting a data stream. The data that you're getting is, well, these days, at least 1 million pixels on your monitor. Each pixel has a color and an intensity and a location. And you look at those 1 million pixels and you interpret those 1 million little dots of light as rivers and streams and mountains and creatures and trees and other players. That's your interpretation of what those little dots of light mean. What we'll call source is what I call the larger consciousness system. Mm. That's just consciousness. That consciousness system can configure part of itself as a server to serve up this virtual reality. And we ourselves, we individuated units of consciousness, are also a piece of that source. Okay, so think of a source that is consciousness, an information system.
All right.
I guess maybe I should have stated that consciousness is an information system. Okay, so think of that and then think that it takes a part of itself and turns that into an individuated unit of consciousness. If you'd like to think of it in computer terms, think of it as like a virtual machine. We, the IUOC, are like a small emulation of the larger system, a virtual machine, a piece of consciousness partitioned off that has its own memory, has its own processing, and so on, so that that's us, a little piece of the source. So the system creates patterns of patterns, and can give those patterns significance. It could be a 1 and it could be a 0. It could do that. And now you could have patterns of 1s and 0s. Well, If you have patterns in ones and zeros, that's basically what a general purpose computer works with, is patterns of ones and zeros. This consciousness system evolves by lowering its entropy, creating information. If it de-evolves and raises its entropy, if it does that long enough, then it dies. No more information is left. So you don't have an information system anymore. So that's what consciousness is. It's an information system, and it is evolving by lowering its entropy. Now, patterns of patterns can only go so far before you start to slow down on your ability to evolve and come up with new meaningful things. So one of the first things it did was invent a new technology called regular time, which is just a 1 and a 0 going back and forth, 1 0 1 0 1 0, which is a metronome. Now a metronome keeps time. So now before there was like primordial time defined by change. Now there can be regular time. Now with regular time you can have sequences, precise sequences of patterns of sequences. See, it can get a lot more complex, which means there's more order, which means there's lower entropy. So the system is evolving. Again, it got to a point where its evolution started to slow down. And the next step was to increase the potential of things the system could do. Well, the obvious answer there was it split off a part of itself, gave that other part of itself free will as well, and now interacted with it. So now there's two things with free will interacting with each other. The possibilities grow, and it could duplicate that process, and now there's hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of other things with free will, all interacting with the system and with each other. Now the potentialities, what might you build with that? What could you do with that system? Well, that's a lot more potential. It's the same thing. It's the same thing if you look at our evolution that our cells did, and for the same reason. We had single-celled things first before there were multi-celled things. And in order to lower entropy, have more choices, more options, which basically makes it more survivable than multiple-celled things. A cell divided, interacted with itself. Those cells then learned to cooperate. You ended up with multi-celled things, which were more complex than single-celled things, therefore lower entropy. Entropy is a measure of disorder. Yeah. So as you have more order, more structure, then you have lower entropy, more ability, more capabilities, more potential. More in physics, we'd say that, we have more ability to do work. Now, I made some assumptions here that that there was free will, that the system had free will. Well, I start this whole theory with the assumption that consciousness exists. Now, trying to derive where does the consciousness come from, I can give some hand waving, or what's it called, conjecture. Hand waving is kind of a physics term. It means, oh yeah, this and then this. You're making stuff up, right? You reach up and you're pulling down stuff.
Black matter.
Yeah. So that's conjecture.
Yeah.
So pretty good conjecture, though, that it kind of defines how consciousness might have come about. It's not just my conjecture. You can go to Stanford philosophy and look up cellular automata and consciousness.
I'll take a look at it.
I just start with consciousness, though. And if you have consciousness, what consciousness does is it makes choices. Well, if you have choices, then two more things you have to have as well. You have to have time, because before you made the choice, after you make the choice creates change.
Right.
It creates a difference. Anytime you have change, you have to have time. So time has to also come in with consciousness. And if you have a choice, then you have to have free will. There cannot be determinism, because with determinism, there is no choice. That's the whole point. Everything's determined. There is no such thing as choice. So in order to have consciousness, you have to also have free will, okay, and time. those three things are all logically necessary for each other to exist. Now, the opposite of that is determinism and materialism. That's the opposite camp. All of those are, we call them hallucinations. Those are all just things we think we have, but we really don't. You know?
Yeah. Neil deGrasse Tyson, I've heard him suggest that consciousness, well, he thinks, well, maybe there is no such thing as consciousness. And I'm just like, well, then you're not here.
Yeah, it's a pretty goofy argument. I would agree with you. Yeah, and there is no such thing as choice. Right, and everything's determinist.
Then don't live.
Yeah, right.
It's just funny to hear people talk that way when they're obviously, their philosophy in life is not acting in that manner.
Right. Yeah, it's completely contrary to what's going on right in front of you. Right. They're making choices. They are speaking. Speaking requires a lot of choices. The choice of the words you're going to use, the choice of the ideas you want to put across, and so when they're speaking, and they basically say that consciousness is an illusion. Yet there they are having conversations, making choices, and the time is an illusion also. But there they are, speaking linear sentences that take time, and looking at their watch for when they have to go to their next meeting and saying that time is an illusion. So it's a little goofy. But the reason that they go there is because of materialism. Because Tyson is a physicist. If you're a scientist, then you probably are a materialist. The material world is all there is. If you're a materialist, you have to also be a determinist, because materialism requires determinism. Those two have to go together. Two incompatible, different ways of looking at the world. But most scientists are materialists, which means they have to be determinists if they're consistent.
Sure.
So that's why you have people who sound like they're intelligent talking about there is no such thing as time, when there they are, in the middle of it, and there is no such thing as consciousness, and there is no such thing as free will, even though they're exhibiting all three all the time. They say it's just an illusion. And when you ask them to, well, explain that illusion, they generally don't do too well. It goes back to an equation that is misinterpreted. So.
Well, I think they get caught up. I listen to a lot of people. So it was Sam Harris. He thinks that free will ought to, if you have free will, then that means that you can make any choice you want. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah,
well, a lot of people have that kind of backwards idea about free will. That's not what free will is. Free will is not a genie with with an unlimited number of wishes. It's like, if I had free will, I would be, young and handsome and independently wealthy, and I obviously don't have free will because I can't have everything I want. Well, that's not what free will is. Free will is that you can choose from among the choices that you know of, that you have.
Yeah.
So let's say, there's some situation and there's 20 things that you could do. There's 20 different choices there that you could make in this situation.
Yeah.
Well, let's say you're only aware of 10 of them. The others you're not even aware of. You've never thought of them. They're kind of outside of your thinking process. So if you're aware of 10 of them, then you have free will to make one of those 10 choices. That's all free will is. Your ability to make a choice from the set of choices that you know about, that exist.
Right.
I call that your decision space.
If you told, an esports player that he's not making choices on the field, the digital field that he's in, playing Rocket League or going around with a gun in Fortnite, they would be like, what do you mean I'm not making choices?
Well, also tell that person with free will, with that athlete or that person playing Fortnite, that there's no need to practice because it's all deterministic. It's all going to happen however it happens anyway. So why should you practice and get good at it?
Yeah.
You'll be, it's all going to happen. It's all determined. So there's no point practicing. So you're an athlete, you want to run the marathon, but you weigh, you're 200 pounds overweight, smoke and, have a hard time going up steps, but hey, don't worry about it. You can run that marathon if that's what's determined. And if it's not determined, you can't run it if you don't have any choice. It's
right.
Just, everything is the way it is. Right. So see, none of that makes sense. If you try to apply any of that materialistic, deterministic thinking, it just flies right in the face of your experience. Your experience isn't like that. And the fact that all of those are some kind of neat illusion is also silly, because if it's deterministic and nothing can change, then what's the point of it?
Right. And it also gives people incentive to veg out having that viewpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, so why go through the motions? If nothing changes, then you're learning nothing. Mm-hmm. You're not evolving. You're not changing. You can't learn. You can't become. You just are, and everything's stuck exactly as it is, and nothing happens. Nothing goes anywhere.
Yep.
So if you look at that, then what's the purpose? What's the point? You don't have a reality like our physical universe with all the stuff going on and actually have no purpose or point for it whatsoever. That makes no sense. Obviously, there's structure here. Yeah, there's evolution, there's change, there is point, there is purpose to it. Now with consciousness, the purpose is to lower entropy. It's evolve or die. It's kind of like us. You got to grow up and keep learning, keep becoming, or you start to go away. You start to de-evolve. We're all in this together. That's the point. What can we create together? It's the potential goes way up. Well, a social system evolves by lowering its entropy, and lowering its entropy means more structure and more cooperation. More cooperation means more caring, mm-hmm. less self-centeredness. It means more, more awareness of other. So that, then, I summarize all of that as love. That's the love side. So we're here to evolve toward becoming love, toward caring about other people, not just ourselves. We're here to get rid of our fear. Fear is what gets in the way of evolution. Mm-hmm. Fear is de-evolutionary. Fear tends to tear things apart. If you have fear, then you don't have trust. The system did not program this virtual reality. It basically let it evolve. Mm. You start with a set of initial conditions and a rule set. The rule set says, how can those initial conditions interact with each other? And then you push the run button and you let it evolve and see what happens. If you don't like it, you change the initial conditions and you change the rule set and try it again. So by cutting and trying, you eventually get something that is stable. And that's how this virtual reality we call the physical universe, that's how it evolved. So that's the Big Bang. That ball of plasma, high temperature, high pressure, that goes bang, and then from there our whole universe evolves, and we in it evolve. Well, that was the initial conditions, was that ball of plasma. And the rule set, well, that's what we call science. That's the physics, the chemistry, the biology, that's the rule set. And
so we understand it because we're part of it.
Right. So the body is a representation of the rule set and evolution. And the consciousness can play that body, but it can only play it in as much as it can't do things that are outside the rule set. Like, you can't flap your arms and fly away because you just can't move your arms fast enough, to get yourself off the ground. That's just the biology. It's the way you're built. Mm-hmm. So that's the rule set. And of course, our virtual realities are the same thing. When you play No Man's Sky or World of Warcraft or any of those other multiplayer games, then you can only do what the rule set says you can do. in that game. You know, if the rule set says you can flap your arms and fly, well, there you go, off, you know, into the air. But if the rule set says no, then you can't. If the rule set says you have to come up above the water to breathe or you'll die, well, then you better get your character up to the surface every once in a while, or, you know, you'll be back to the graveyard.
Right.
You're going to die. There's rules and you have to abide by them. So our scientists engage in trying to figure out what the rules are. They're trying to pick out, you know, what are the rules? That's science, that's physics, that's chemistry, that's biology. And if you're a consciousness, and let's say your avatar gets damaged in an automobile accident and has maybe brain trauma and slurs its speech and can't stand up anymore, it doesn't affect you, the consciousness, but it affects what you can do with your avatar as a consciousness. So now you have to play an avatar that can't speak and can't stand up. So that limits then what you can do with that avatar and what you can learn. So it works that way. So see, we, physical bodies, are just virtual. Our brain doesn't store or compute anything. That's all done in consciousness. The brain is just there to set the constraints of the rule set upon consciousness. So conscious can't do anything, can't do anything that the biology doesn't support.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, well, it's just like any other video game where you have an avatar and it has its own set of parameters on how it behaves and operates. And powers, some of them have special powers and other ones have other special powers, and like it's just it's the rules.
Right, and the way you level up in those games is to get perhaps more hit points or you know, more experience points, or gather more gold, or whatever the object of the game is. You know, that's how you level up. In our virtual reality, the way you level up is by making low entropy choices, by making higher quality choices. And as you level up, you end up with a bigger decision space. You end up with more choices, greater choices. You get bigger and bigger pictures, more and more understanding. You become a more powerful being. So what your listeners are doing when they're out there playing in a multiplayer virtuality game is very much the same thing that they're doing in this physical reality, walking around here on Earth with a human body. It's the same sort of thing. They're making choices for their character. And as they make those choices, that character evolves, gets rid of its fear, right? Becomes more cooperative, more interactive, more useful, part of the whole. And that person, then we say, raises the quality of their consciousness. You know, it's evolving, it's lowering its entropy. If you make poor choices, then you de-evolve. So you make a lot of very bad choices in the opposite direction, get more fear and more self-centered, then you have to work that off to go back even where you were before. You know, you have to do then some work just to get back to where you were before. You've dug yourself a hole that you have to get out of. And if you keep de-evolving enough, well, then you disappear. So, you know, that's the name of the game. So it's the thing is that back in the 1920s, almost not exactly, but very close to a century ago, you know, from about 1915 and 1925, somewhere in there, that's when quantum mechanics was being pulled together as a science. And they knew then that materialism wasn't right, because they found out that particles aren't particles, they're probability distributions. The best way to model a particle is as a probability distribution, and that the observer is somehow key in how an experiment turns out. You know, and of course, all these things make sense from the virtual reality perspective, because of course the observer is important, because virtual realities exist only in the minds of the players. You know, think of the virtual reality games you play. That server is not serving out anything if there are no players in the game. If the players, you know, if there's 0 players in No Man's Sky, then you got a server that's not doing anything. There's nothing to do. The only thing the server does is to send data streams out to players. No players, no data streams go out. The server has the potential to serve out information, but it doesn't do it. So in any case, that's kind of the overall theory, that we're living in a virtual reality. Consciousness is the computer. We're a piece of consciousness playing an avatar human. We're doing this because we need to grow up, increase the quality of our consciousness, become more cooperative and caring about people, not be so self-centered, and not be so fearful.
What kind of experiments are you working on without getting overly technical about it? I know that
Okay.
I'm trying, because
Okay.
I know I looked at a video of yours not too long ago, and they looked like they were the double slit experiment, but just a lot more complicated.
Yeah, well, yeah, I won't get into that, but, and the paper has already been written and already been published. I first wrote the paper, got it published in International Quantum Mechanics Journal, peer-reviewed paper.
Wow.
So that was probably 2017. We got that done. And basically it was about these experiments. And now I have a guy who's at California Polytech, it's usually just called Cal Poly in Pomona,
Right.
who's doing the experiments. And he's been working on it about a year, which unfortunately is a long, long time. But these experiments are kind of picky, and the equipment is also picky and expensive. And it takes a while before you get all the right pieces together.
Yeah.
And because he had never actually done experiments like this before, he had a learning curve to get over.
Did the lockdowns affect that at all?
It did affect it quite a bit, because, he went into the lab one day and the guard said, nope, nobody on campus. The campus was shut down entirely. And it took him a couple of months to get special permission, just to go into the lab by himself in an empty lab, It was like, well, that's, we have a rule. The rule is that the campus is shut down. So he says, yes, but, and he tried, and finally they said, okay, we can give you an exception, but you'll have to apply for that exception every day. We can only give it to you for a day. And, so on it went. I don't know if you've ever dealt with higher education bureaucracy or not, but there's so many committees and so many people in the decision loop that everything takes a very long time, for the simplest. I mean, this is obvious, right? One guy by himself in an empty lab is not a COVID problem.
To them, they would probably just be like, yeah, I mean, I understand, that seems logical, but you got just too much red tape because there's too many cooks in the kitchen.
Right. So it is just slow, but we're getting close, I think. I'm hopeful that in a couple of months we'll have the first results. And what those experiments are going to do, the first one and the simplest one, always do the simplest one first.
Yeah.
Is going to basically challenge present quantum mechanics theory. Quantum mechanics theory as it is says, well, things work this way. And my theory says, no, they don't. They work that way. And this experiment will show which way they work. And the other experiments are designed to produce very strong evidence for two things. One, that this is indeed a virtual reality. And the second thing is develop evidence for consciousness is the computer. So in physics, we don't talk about proving things. That was pre-Newton. Newton had laws, because these laws were the truth, and the truth would remain forever. And then, of course, we find out they're not laws; they're just approximations. So physics got away from that. This is the truth. We're going to prove this. They basically now experiments are to gather evidence. We have now already a pretty high stack of evidence from quantum mechanics that we live in an information-based reality. That's the way physicists like to say it.
Are they just trying to break it to people softer, or?
No, it's not that at all. It's that they don't know what else to say about it. They're stuck there.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we're in this information-based reality. It looks like reality is computed, and they'll get that far, but they have no idea what to say next. It's like, well, explain that, and they can't explain it. They don't know what it means. They doesn't know how it works. They don't know how it's computed, where it's computed, why it's computed. or even the whole idea of being computed seems ridiculous to them. You know, they just know that it is that way. Their experiments tell them that reality is information-based. And because they don't know how to take the next step, that's all they're going to say.
Is that next step scary for them, or is it just?
It's very scary for them.
Yeah.
Because if this is a virtual reality, then it's computed. And if it's computed, it has to be computed, like Fredkin, a physicist, said, it has to be computed from other. And what's other? Other than here. You see, the computer that computes a virtual reality can't be a part of the virtual reality, can't be in the virtual reality. The computer that computes the virtual reality has to be non-physical relative to the viewpoint of an avatar in the virtual reality. Right. So if you're in the virtual reality and you're an elf playing World of Warcraft and you're this elf running around, then you're not going to be able to find the computer that computes your reality inside your reality. You know, virtual realities don't compute themselves. They have to be computed from a source that's outside. That's scary to them because that sounds like regressing back to the bad old days when the high priests were in charge and the scientists were under house arrest or burning at the stake, you know. So they don't like that idea about ending up with a non-physical source that is more primary than the physical. It just tears up all the foundation they've laid under themselves as scientists. You never solve a problem by sticking your head in the sand and denying that it's a problem. You know, that's not on the path to going forward.
Yeah, you get a lot of subscribers and view count on your videos.
Yes, do. And you know, that paper published in that quantum mechanics journal got more requests for prints, for looks, than any other article that they had. So it was the hottest item in the journal forever. Probably still is the hottest item in the journal. So there's a lot of interest out there, even among the physics community, because who else reads physics journals? Yeah. I mean, nobody else is reading physics, you know, quantum mechanics journals. So it's obviously other physicists, and there's a lot of interest there in this subject, but they just don't know how to take the next step. The non-scientists, I get a lot of support there. I get a lot of support. When I give talks, I generally have at least half the group is technical.
Yeah.
I have a lot of computer science people there because they get it. You know, they're working with computers and virtual realities and things like that. They can see that, how that works from a technical viewpoint and how it could work. So it makes sense to them. Makes good logical sense to them. So I do get a lot of computer types, and I get a lot of engineers. I get a fair number of physicians. I also get about the other half of my audience tends to be very right-brained. The people who have experienced things that my theory allows and the present physics doesn't allow, like the paranormal, things like remote viewing, things like, you know, telepathic conversations, that kind of thing. Getting data from databases, intuition. See, the science group and the determinists and materialists say there is no intuition. But a lot of people have had a lot of intuition, precognitive dreams. You know, there's lots of those that have been written down. And scientists have been studying that. Now there's even a parapsychology branch in most schools. They've been studying these things for many decades. And there's a very long list of well-documented cases of these things do exist. They're real. To think that most of this paranormal stuff is all just woo-woo, that's not real, that's all imaginary, that's only people who are ignorant would have that viewpoint, because there's really tons of information to the contrary that puts it squarely on the map. Otherwise, you wouldn't have parapsychology departments in most all the universities if they actually didn't have anything that they were doing other than making things up. And my theory explains it. My theory explains, how does remote viewing work? Well, it explains it in detail. This is exactly how it works. And how does, you know, telecommunication work? Well, here's how it works. So the structure is all there to describe how all these things work. How does the intuition work? And can the intuition be just as accurate and just as reliable as the intellect? Yes, indeed it can, but you have to develop it. And mostly in our culture, we don't develop the intuitive side. We only develop the intellectual side.
Maybe sometime in a distant past, we maybe used to have a better intuitive.
We did, because our intellect didn't have as much to work with at that time. Now our intellect has good descriptions for almost everything.
Do you think that that's a retroactive consequence to science coming into play?
Sure. Yeah, okay. As we have gotten more scientific and more rational about the objective world, we've cared less and less about the subjective world. Even to the point that the scientists say the subjective world is all an illusion. It's all imagination. None of it exists. Well, the subjective world is where we live most of our life. Most all the choices we make that are important are subjective choices. Who should I marry? What job should I take? What should I study in school? All these things will have profound effects on a person's life, but they're all subjective. They're not objectively made. There's not enough information to objectively make any of those choices. Happiness, justice, love, caring, empathy, all of this stuff is subjective. And that's the important stuff in life, not, the objective stuff. I mean, it's nice to know how an internal combustion engine works. Mm-hmm. That's handy. We know that, so we can build them and we can make them and we can do these things. We have this technology, but that's not where the real important stuff is in our life. The important stuff's over on the subjective side. If you had the intuitive side gathering information and the intellectual side, processing that information logically, wow, you could do a whole lot better than you could if you just have one or the other. So if you have one or the other, you're unbalanced. If you're very intellectual, well, we just call you normal. But if you're very intuitive, we call you a space cadet, and we make fun of people who are like that because they seem like they're not really plugged in. They're kind of drifting around in some alternate reality someplace. Well, they are.
That was my childhood.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. They are drifting around in some alternate reality, the larger reality. But that can be very profitable if you really develop it. Most of the right brain people don't really develop it very much. They just kind of blunder around in it. Most of the left brain people aren't really all that logical either. They don't develop it all that much. But if you had both, now you've got a whole brain.
And I'm a right brain person myself, but I mean, it was just something that I escaped to. So the reasoning just to go there was not actually a good reason in the end. So. Now there's a better reason for it if I wanted to.
A lot of people are like that. People who have those skills, a lot of them are just as you said. They got that way because they escaped from the objective reality to escape its pain. And if you spend enough time in the intuitive side, well, you start to develop it. Mm-hmm. You become more tuned into it.
Players who are finding a way to, they've always been playing games. They've always been developing this is their escape in a way, and then they're mm-hmm. making a real sport out of it. I was very surprised.
They would understand how this could be a video game and how that would work and how it would be set up. Just the whole structure of that is like, yeah, that makes sense. I see how that could work. Whereas you take some, physicist who's always been a materialist and they look at it and say impossible. Mm-hmm. Couldn't possibly work. So sure, yeah, young people are more open, particularly gamers.
Yeah.
Are more open to these concepts. So there's something for the gamers. They can say that they actually are closer to understanding advanced physics than the physicists are, because of their association with the games. There are gamers and then there are other gamers. All gamers are not created equal. Some gamers are excellent And I know when they compete with each other, the excellent, rise to the top. And if they look at how they do what they do, they will find that it's not an intellectual thing that they're doing. They're not thinking about, oh, I need to move my mouse a little more to the right and a little more to the left to make my character go. They're not thinking about it at all. It's all intuitive. They've played it so many times and done and practiced so often that the gameplay and the controlling the character is all intuitive without any thought applied to it at all. And if they've played a particular game enough, the nature of the game and kind of the mindset of the people who made the game and how that game works, not just the rules that anybody can read, but a deeper understanding of the game starts to develop in their own minds, and that also becomes intuitive. So they can anticipate what's happening next, and they can start to actually move their hand to do what they want to do a little bit ahead of the thing happening.
Yeah.
It's not our intellect. Our intellect is kind of bulky and hesitant and second guesses itself, and it just isn't the smooth performer that the intuitive side is. And that's true of gamers as well as anybody else. So the really good ones are developing their intuitive side with those games. And it may be that they even develop their intuitive side a little better than most other things that we do. All those kids wasting all that time, they should go outside and play, that kind of thing, You hear that, but there's a lot to be learned there as far as developing your mind and skills, as there is in most things, and maybe even a little more, because it does put you a little closer to the truth of the way the world actually works.
Tom, I love this talk. I appreciate you coming in and sharing with us your theory, how it relates to everyone, including especially how it relates to esports. Thank you for coming in. I know your time is limited, so it's just a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you, Chase. It was fun. Glad to be here. I hope I've said something that is useful to your audience.